Hey, this is Professor Triplet, and we are going to talk about blocking out our mesh a little bit, and then just going a little bit of ZBrush. This is kind of not all-inclusive tutorial on ZBrush. It's going to be really light, but it's going to just talk about some of the basics. Okay, first thing I want to say is that I built this all from quad spheres. It's just blocking out my character. I wanted to talk about a few things that you're going to want to make sure you do. Number one, you're going to want to make sure the character is dead center in the world. So if you look at my grid, everything is lining up perfectly with the grid. Okay, and I do have the feet basically on the 0 in the Y direction. When it comes to stuff like hands and feet, because we're going to use this thing called Dynamesh, you want to make sure that you have just a little bit of separation between like the fingers, separation between the legs. If this toe here and this toe here were closer together, we could have a problem because the Dynamesh will try to like join those two meshes together. If these ears were a little bit lower, you can run into a problem where it tries to mesh the arm and the ears together. So that's basically it. So when you're building this thing, one of the things I did to really help me was I used a lot of soft select. So I would just grab my quad sphere and go into my soft select, turn it on, and obviously you have colors that represent like the fall off, and you can obviously make it harder or softer, or I should say greater or less really is the right word. And so what you can see here is I can go ahead and just grab this and do general adjustments on the mesh so I can get it close to the size that I want. Okay, so that's basically just a simple block out. Also think about moving your pivot points so you can like rotate the arms correctly and stuff like that. It'll help you. This piece right here, this ear, is just basically this top like section of a sphere, and then I just basically added a few edge loops. So there is a tiny bit of modeling I did, but it's very, very, very light, just kind of pulling and pushing and then adding an edge loop here and there. So that's the basics of getting this thing ready. Now when you want to get it out of here, what you want to do is just select your model and go ahead and hit export selection, and then OBJ, because that's what ZBrush wants, and then just do like Duncan Blockout to export selection. Yeah, we'll replace it. I already had one, so you obviously might be making a new one. And then we'll jump into ZBrush. Now, typically there might be some panels that pop up. Just close those. You can hit hide on this. And I just want to, this is just like a very brief overview of ZBrush. Not too much in depth, but I'll show you a little bit of stuff. So, okay, import obviously is the first thing we want to do to get our model in. So let's go ahead and go to the latest and greatest area where we were at. I'm in the wrong area. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just open this. And you can see it's up in my tools area now because this is considered a tool. And I'm going to go ahead and draw this out. So all I'm going to do is left click in the canvas here and just drag up. And you'll see it kind of comes out. I'm going to let go of my mouse. And then I'm going to go ahead and do something goofy. You don't have to do this, but just watch what happens. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to left click and drag out. And it's like, oh, wait, what? And then I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it again. And you may be saying, what is going on here? Well, ZBrush has a 2D side as well as a 3D side, and I can just sit here and just keep drawing these out. And basically it's drawing these 3D objects onto the 2D plane at this point. I'm going to hit Control N, it's going to clear everything. I'm going to draw it back out again, and just maybe move my mouse a little bit. And then I'm just going to hit edit before I do anything else. So once I hit edit, I can go ahead and click outside of this and I can start rotating it. Now we have a 3D object that's editable. Alright, so your controls, your main controls are on the side here. You have frame, you have move, you have zoom, and then you have rotate. Okay, now you can rotate just by left clicking in here. Actually, you can right click as well. If you're actually over the model, you can still right click and rotate. But if you're over the model and you left click, it'll start actually sculpting on the model. Okay. To move, the hotkey to move is to hold Alt and left click, or right click for that matter. To zoom in and out, it's a little bit weird. You have to hold Alt like you're moving it, and then you let go of the Alt key, but you keep holding your mouse key, and you can drag up and down to zoom in and out. Those are the main hotkeys. And then F is to frame it, just like in Maya. Okay, so at its very core, ZBrush is just about pushing and pulling points. So if you think about like digital sculpting, it's just basically taking a brush and being able to intuitively push and pull points, more like a sculptor would versus versus like in a 3D program where you're actually grabbing verts and moving them. You're technically doing the same thing, you're just doing it in a way that feels more natural to the artist. Well, at least most artists. Okay, so by the way I'm snapping into view is I just hold shift as I start rotating. You can snap into different views. So the first brush that they start you with is a standard brush, and that's just basically like the brush that will just, anywhere you run that over, it'll kind of just bulges the surface out based on how much intensity you have set. So right now it's at 25. So if I turn it up to 100 and I do the same stroke, you can see it's going to go further out, more intensity. So typically, it depends on what you're doing, but typically I don't rarely have it at 100. Okay, so I don't use many brushes. Sometimes for special things I'll use like some of these crazy brushes that they have here. There's a whole ton of them, as you can see. Just click on this. But a lot of times the main brushes I'm using is the standard, the move brush, the smooth brush, and then these clay brushes. And then of course there's this damn standard that is pretty important too. I use that a lot. But other than that, you can do a lot of sculpting with just those main brushes. So, and at the end of the day, like I said, we're just pulling and pushing points when it comes down to it. Okay, let me show you something here. So if I go ahead and I just drag, well, let's turn on symmetry first. So if I hit X on my keyboard, watch my cursor here. You can see I popped up another dot on the other side. So now I have symmetry on. So now if I start sculpting this, you can see the same thing's happening to both sides. Let's undo that. Let's turn our intensity up a little bit. Okay, so it says Z add. It's basically going to push the points on the Z to add, volume to it. The Z subtract will actually indent. So if I turn that on, I can go ahead and indent in. But you don't really need to keep switching back and forth. So let me just undo that. If you have Z add on, all you have to do is hold Alt. And if you look at my cursor right now, there's a subtraction mark over the like in the middle circle. So that means that it will actually divot in instead of, it'll subtract from the Z depth instead of add to it. Okay, so ultimately that's it. That's kind of sculpting in a nutshell. You can sculpt all kinds of shapes just from that lesson. Let me hold Shift on my keyboard, and you'll see my cursor turns blue. That's for smooth. So you also notice that my settings up here change. So the smooth is set by default at 100. So if I hold Shift, I can see my smooth here. And then let's just smooth something. So let's start smoothing this out a little bit. Okay, just all kinds of weird smoothing. Undo. That's just from holding Shift. If I want less smoothing to happen, I can just turn the Z intensity down. And now when my smoothing will go slower, which might be better. I usually turn that down. Okay, so let's just show the move brush, because I think that's, to me in the beginning, this is the most important thing. Let's say you bring your model into ZBrush and you're like, well, I'm going to shape it a little bit in ZBrush. I use the move brush typically to shape things a lot. And there's actually a couple move brushes. There's move elastic, move typological. these two are going to be really good friends of yours. Okay, so the move brush will grab any area, and you basically move it based on screen space. So if I turn it this way, you know, start pulling, I can actually like cave these things in on each other. But basically, you know, you can start just lightly adjusting things. Okay, that's pretty important. All right. And the move topological brush will allow you to, let's say you have a separate mesh and you only want to touch one mesh, it will only affect the first mesh unit that you touch. So in other words, like since this piece and this piece are separate, I'll turn on my wireframe, you can tell like these are separate pieces. The move topological will respect this one piece and only move anything on this piece. You'll notice that I have this, my cursor is like this circle, and the circle is actually controlled here. You can see draw size, and then you can see focal shift. Okay, so the focal shift basically will put so anything that's within that center circle, any piece of the mesh, it will be affected at 100% of you know, deformation based on how much intensity you have. So if you have 100 and 100, then it's going to move it, you know, 100% basically. But if you have like 50 or 30 and 100, then it's going to, the numbers vary. But basically, whatever's in the center of that focal shift is going to be affected the most. And then it falls off as it goes to the outer circle. So, and then the draw size, of course, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can get a lot of these settings by hitting spacebar. It'll just pop up right in your viewport, right in your canvas. And so I can go ahead and adjust this right here, adjust my focal shift, and, you know, I can just keep working. So, you know, like for instance, like before you go ahead and, you know, Dynamesh this, you may want to adjust a few things. So we're going to Dynamesh soon. But let's say I just want to adjust my ears a little bit or something. Or if I want to smooth them a little bit, hold shift and just kind of smooth them out. Maybe I want to pull this out. Oh, one thing the move brush will do is that the move brush, if you hold Alt, it will basically inflate the verts based on their normals. So basically moving almost like the standard brush moves it, but you can just kind of click on one spot and start like bulging it out a little bit. So if you just need like these little minor adjustments, I do that a lot actually. You know, I'll look at this and I'll be like, wow, this shoulder needs to come over a little bit. So what if I just pull it that way and I just hold Alt and I start to drag on it? But it just takes some practice. ZBrush is not something that you're gonna like master overnight. If you have traditional sculpting skills, it will be easier because it basically, a lot of the principles still apply, but it's not something that people usually pick up and master in like one session. So you have to be patient when you're using this. Having a Wacom tablet is helpful, just FYI, because it does work with pressure sensitivity. So just letting you guys know. You can play around with those things. Okay, so now that you've kind of got a feel for what the brushes can do and how to adjust them, and you can hold Alt, you know, to get the negative and, you know, the negative, subtract. Let's go ahead and actually Dynamesh this. So I'm going to go into the geometry here, and all I did was click on the rollout, and then there's a Dynamesh rollout here. I'm going to click on this. Now what Dynamesh does is it basically projects like a mesh onto the outer surface of this model, and then it will go ahead and unify that mesh based on whatever's on the outside surface. But this is all based on basically like a resolution grid. So the higher I have my resolution, the more defined the Dynamesh will be. If I keep it lower, like for instance, let's just turn this down to like 100 and I hit this, you're going to lose a lot of detail. It's doing a decent job, but like in the ears, it's having problems, and I'm sure the hands probably have some issues. Yeah, you can see you're getting webbing in the hands there. So if I don't like that, I can go ahead and turn this up Like, let's just try like 360, hit Dynamesh, and you can see now it did a pretty good job with the hands. Looks like the eyes, the face, everything looks pretty good. It held everything together pretty well. So you can see it looks a little bit faceted because it's holding the shape of the original mesh that I gave to it. So if I want to go ahead and smooth this out a little bit, there's a couple things I can do. Let's just turn off polyframe, and we'll go to this deformation, and you can just go ahead and polish it a little bit. Okay, so that helped a little bit. And then, of course, there's the smooth brush. Now, I'm going to talk about masking really quick. I don't want to go too far into this, but let me undo a couple things here. Okay, so masking, if you hold Control and you go over your mesh, you can see there's a thing that says mask, and it has a plus on it. Masking is very important when you're sculpting, because you may want an area that you don't want to be affected. So for instance, if I want to keep these eyeballs the way they are, let me make this smaller. I can go like that and mask those off and then do a polish. And everything gets polished except for those eyeballs because they've been masked. And to clear the mask, I just hold Control and swipe outside of the model. Okay. So masking is very, very important. There's a lot more to masking. Like there's different kinds of, you can lasso mask and curve mask and pen mask. And so there's a lot more to it than just, just this as a mask. But just know that it's an important step of sculpting to be able to isolate areas by masking it or hiding certain areas. These are all things like you can do that in Maya by hiding a mesh. You can also do it in ZBrush. But that's beyond this tutorial. I just wanted to get people so that they can unify their mesh so they can retopologize in Maya. So now at this point, the other thing I probably want to do is I'm going to just smooth out this belly a little bit, like so. Maybe smooth out the joints just a little bit. I don't like what happened in this mouth area, so I'm just gonna kind of fix that up a little bit. And once I'm done showing the basics here, I will off camera go ahead and do some minor sculpting on this because I do want to sculpt a mouth into it. So like another thing is I use that ball for this joint, so that kind of needs to be just adjusted a little bit right there. And I think that looks pretty good for right now. Let me show that damn standard really quick. So it stands for Damien Standard Brush, and this is basically show you what this does. I'm going to turn the intensity down just a little bit. Let's do it again. Actually, let's turn it up so you can really see what's happening. So what the Damien Standard Brush does, it looks kind of bad there. It's probably because I'm using my mouse and not my there. That's more what I was looking for. The Damien Standard Brush allows you to kind of do like these tight cuts. So just a little tidbit about ZBrush. Not only do you have a certain kind of stroke type, a certain kind of brush type, but you also have an alpha that you can use. And the alpha will dictate basically, it's kind of like a brush in Photoshop. So the shape that's going to affect the mesh is this little tiny dot with this fall off. And there's default alphas in here, but you can make your own alphas in Photoshop and bring them in. And that there's a lot of sculpting that you can do just through the alphas, and putting alphas onto your mesh to get surface deformation. So that, like I said, that's beyond this tutorial, but the Damien Standard is using the alpha to get this little kind of tight crease in here. It's also using some other things. You can customize your own brushes in ZBrush. So the Damien Standard is definitely a customized brush that's doing a pinch operation. So it's kind of pinching the polygons together. That's why you're seeing them kind of collapse in towards each other as I stroke on these. So just things to be aware of. I mean, it's not really, it's not necessary to know all that stuff to get started, but it's just good to know that. I might smooth like this out a little bit, and eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to kind of do a mouth here like that, so you can see how easy that was with the Dynamesh standard brush. Let's undo that. So sometimes the thing that you're going to do in ZBrush a lot is like sculpt a little bit and then smooth it and then resculpt it. It's a back and forth process. It's not usually done in just like one fell swoop. You may want to add volume. So like I said, I use like these clay brushes are really good for adding volume. So like let's say, oops, that's crazy. It's kind of intense. So I may want to just add like a little bit of volume and smooth that out. So there's all kinds of fun stuff you can get into here. It's really, really a fun tool, ZBrush. It's just, it does have a bit of a learning curve for the interface. So let's see, there's clay buildup. Let's try that. So now the clay buildup uses an alpha, and what that does is that's why it looks like rectangular when you see how that's happening there. It's using this alpha to dictate the brush. So I'm gonna, with my tablet, I'm gonna go in and just do little adjustments here, and then we'll get back into Maya eventually, and we'll start actually retopologing this. Okay, so the last thing, let's just say you have everything done, it looks good, and you want to take your your Dynamesh back into Maya. You can go ahead and just go export, and then you can export as a different name, like I have one there. One of the other things you could do too is you could turn off Dynamesh if you want to get like a little bit lower polygon mesh. Like right now we're at 136,000 polygons, but let's say we wanted a little bit less. We can do a ZRemesh, and a ZRemesh basically, I'm not going to go through all of the settings here, but basically this main setting is the target polygon count. You can say, okay, it's any number you see here is times 1,000, so this would be 5,000 polygons is my target polygon count. But let's just say, I'm good with having 30,000. I just don't want to bring in 136,000. And I'm going to go ahead and just hit ZRemesh. So let's look at the wireframe really quick here. So you can see this is the wireframe now, and you'll see how much different it's going to look once I hit ZRemesh. It'll have to think for a second, but it won't take too long. It's usually pretty fast. So wait for it. Wait for it. All right. So backing off here, you can see how nice and clean that is. You definitely want to have your X symmetry on when you do that. It actually even handled the tail pretty good, which is surprising. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes, like when you ZRemesh, it'll just like collapse that tail down, but this time it actually worked pretty well. And you could actually sculpt on this as well. Like there's no reason why you can't reshape using ZRemesh, but I would probably just keep using Dynamesh until I was closer to having the shape that I wanted, and then go ahead and maybe ZRemesh it. All right, so that's it for this tutorial, and in the next one, we'll go into how to start using the quad mesh. So, all right, thanks for watching.